So longevity risk typically is characterized in terms of just of two factors, the level of assets that someone has and the number of years remaining life. And the problem of longevity management is that of making sure that you don't outlive your assets. Um, it can be addressed as an issue at both the aggregate level, which is to say a pension plan sponsor, manager, fund manager, or at the individual level. And for reasons I explain in the paper, bringing in a third factor, disability-free or so active lifetime or active life expectancy. I don't think that it adds much to the issue of aggregate longevity risk, but I think it adds a lot to the issue of individual level longevity risk, which is what I'm going to spend all my time talking about. So next slide, please. Now, adding this third dimension of disability-free or active lifespan, is a simple sounding thing, but a very difficult thing to address empirically because of the absence of data, both an absence of adequate continuous monitoring data, so we can keep track of when people are or are not in a state that we would call disabled, but also having enough years of tracking to make statements about the length of time spent in the disabled or the non-disabled state. There's very large literature that's been around for decades that has tried to quantify active life expectancy as an aggregate or population level phenomenon. But that doesn't really help us very much when we're looking at individuals. So in the findings that I'm going to present to you in the next several slides, I'm going to show you some very simple descriptive information that I put together from a public data source called the Health and Retirement Survey Study, HRS. And its strength, from my point of view, is that it allows us to follow people for up to 18 years. So we get a pretty big chunk of their retirement lifetime. But the weakness of that is that 18 does not represent all of people's retirement. Basically, I'm looking at three factors: how long people have left to live, how much do they have in the way of assets, and are they or are they not disabled year in and year out as we track them. I'm going to take the perspective of a stereotypical or an average 65-year-old who is making a transition from work life to retired life. And it's worth mentioning that the paper that Tim Driver just presented points to a very important way that someone can deal with longevity risk by working longer. If you work longer, you will put off the time of having to draw down your assets. You'll probably add to your asset level and will reduce the drawdown while you continue to work. Okay, so here's the three dimensions, the three factors, and how they relate to each other. Next slide, please. So the first of the three factors I'm going to look at is asset levels. And this is some summary information taken from the Health and Retirement Survey of people around age 65. And it tells a familiar story, which is that by and large, people entering retirement have very little in the way of asset. If you look at the upper part of the table, in the population at large, the mean asset level, this is non-housing wealth, so it's financial wealth. On average, it's $104,000, but the median is under $7,000. And the bottom 20% actually has zero. So wealth distributions are quite skewed and low on average. It looks a little better if you limit yourself to people with positive wealth, but by and large, wealth levels are low. The bottom half of the table, thanks to some very interesting help I got from somebody at TIA-CREF, or TIA, I guess we say now, I was able to calculate what percentage of the population was able to convert their assets to an annuity that they could live on. And even if you limit yourself to the capacity to achieve average annual income net of Social Security benefit, the annuity option, life annuity option, is available to a very small minority of the population. So from this, I conclude that managing longevity risk is really not a problem for many people. They have no assets to manage. Their job instead is to live on Social Security. Next slide. The second factor of the three I'm looking at is the length of remaining lifetime. And this is a picture of the distribution of how many years people have left at age 65, based on the 2009 U.S. Life Table. And the message here is also a very familiar one. There's a lot of uncertainty represented in this very dispersed distribution of remaining life years. The average is about 19 years at age 65, but as you can see, there's a huge spread around that. So the longevity risk management problem is very much a non-trivial problem. Next. Now, I've looked at wealth, assets, and remaining lifetime. It's well known that there's a connection between financial well-being and longevity. This is a very partial picture of that. I've divided the population of 65-year-olds up into those with no wealth and those in the first, second, and through fifth quintile of positive wealth. The height of the bars in this histogram represent the average number of years remaining based on a very simple model of lifetimes. And as you can see, the more wealth you have, the longer you will live. I actually think that for various technical reasons, this understates the differences. That understatement is a consequence of the 18-year limit on what I can see in data that I'm looking at. So next slide, please. So turning to the third dimension, what my paper tries to do is bring in this notion of active or disability-free lifetime, adding to the two basic factors of wealth and longevity. What you see here is that the onset and growth of experience with being disabled is low, and it starts slowly and remains fairly low through the years that I'm able to track people. These graphs, these lines represent experience from age 65 through 84, actually. Bottom line is, what percentage of people at each age are currently classified as disabled? I should say, by the way, that the measurement of disability here is that you're getting help from other people with basic daily tasks like eating, bathing, dressing yourself, and so on. So it's the most basic kind of hands-on personal care activity. The prevalence of current disability is quite low, and it rises to about 20% of the people of age who survive to age 84. The top line represents the average number of years people have spent disabled up to that point. Even that is fairly low. So the early decades, the initial decades of retirement are by and large disability-free on average. Next slide, please. However, there are strong connections between wealth and disability. Just as having more wealth is associated with a longer life, having more wealth is also associated with much less chances of experiencing disability. This bar chart shows you year by year, age by age, the probability that you'll make a transition from disability-free to disabled. The blue bars are for people with no wealth, see it rise quite rapidly. And if you go to the other extreme, the sort of mustardy color bars represent people in the top quintile of wealth. You can see their chances of entering into a disabled state is very, very low. So wealth is highly protective of disability status. Next slide. The other connection I want to draw your attention to is the connection between the onset of disability and remaining lifetime. If you do make a transition from non-disabled to disabled, that's a strong signal that the years remaining to you are lower on average. So once again, this is a graph based upon a simple analytic model that shows year by year, age by age, number of years lifetime on average, depending on how much you have spent disabled so far. So the top line is the blue line. These are people who've had no disability experience. They have the most remaining years of life. The line slopes downward as it should. Every year you live, you have fewer years left for you. But if you go from non-disabled to disabled, jump down from that blue line to the orange one, that signals a loss of several years in your remaining lifetime. So the onset of disability is an indication that you have fewer years left to you. The next slide, please. The thing about the transition from non-disabled to disabled is that, especially the way I've defined it, or measuring it, it indicates that you have a need for care from other people. If you have a need for high levels of care, you're likely to have to make a transition into a nursing home residence in order to achieve that care. At more moderate levels of care need, most care, the majority of care that older people with care needs get, comes from family members, and it is not paid for. So putting all these facts together, I think the evidence I bring to bear in this paper supports the four conclusions here. First of all, to recap the asset level table, for most people, longevity risk is an academic problem. Their problem is not so much whether and how quickly to draw down their assets, but how to live on Social Security. Secondly, people who make a transition from non-disabled to disabled are receiving a strong signal that their remaining lifetime has gotten shorter on average. So they might need to spend down more rapidly, but they may need to spend down to meet care needs. The third point here is, as I was saying, most care is provided without cost by family members, without monetary cost by family members. But at high levels of care needs, people go into nursing homes at great cost and draw down their assets more quickly. So the final point here is to get back to the theme of this workshop conference. There's kind of an odd and distinctive public-private partnership created by the existence of the Medicaid program, which will pay for your nursing home if you have no assets, and the fact that you've become disabled, have care needs, and had to spend your assets to achieve eligibility for Medicaid. In between those two, we have the family serving as an unpaid source of support late in life. You can think of the care that comes from family members as an implicit insurance policy that protects public expenditures and protects private inheritances. And with that, I will conclude and await your questions.